You can get your mount as early as Act 4. This requires completion of the main storyline up till Act 3 and the beginning of Act 4, which includes Fractured Peaks, Skosglen, and Dry Steps. After finishing, you'll have a priority quest here under the white quest tab that will allow you to pick up your mount. When you do acquire that mount, your mount's going to have a couple cooldowns. You can actually instant mount and demount in the city without any cooldown. If you leave the towns, you will have a 10-second cooldown anytime you wish to demount, but it is still instant to remount. So if you're going to go ahead and fight an enemy, you can actually instantly mount after you're fighting them. And if you get knocked off your mount, then you're going to have a 30-second cooldown, which you can remount again. Around the map, you'll find various events, but there is one in particular called the Gathering of Legions open world event that appears randomly. When you go to that location, you will find a campfire. And if you click on that campfire, you will get bonus XP for a short period of time. In this game, you have an instance when you start your game. Now, this is based on the party leader or you yourself. If you're a solo player, you can actually reset the instance by leaving the game and rejoining, which will reset dungeons and various other things around the map. And if you're in a party, you could simply leave the party and then people can join on you and join your party, and it will reset the instance as well. If you rejoin a party that you were part of previously, you will rejoin the previous instance. In the Occultist, you can actually only extract a legendary power once out of a legendary item. You can see here, my legendaries are actually kind of grayed out, and that is because I've already imprinted an aspect on it. And if I wish to imprint, you can see I cannot extract from items with imprinted aspects, so I can only extract it once and then imprint it once. Aspects also can have a range of roles associated with it, meaning that the aspects that you see in the Codex of Power are the minimum available role, and you can actually drop higher rolls and get you higher stats associated with these legendary aspects. If you haven't already and you're enjoying the video, please consider dropping a sub. 86% of you are not subscribed, and it really does help out the channel. Let's get back to it. World bosses appear every once in a while in specific areas, and they will show on the map. If you complete each world boss, which there are 3 each week, you're going to get a weekly bonus spoils, so it's really good to do so. When you're walking around the open world, one important thing to consider is the gatherables you can collect around the world, which will allow you to upgrade your potion and upgrade your gear, and you can actually equip them without demounting, which allows it to be extremely easy. 2 very important materials throughout the game are gold and crafting materials. Now, gold is used for all sorts of things, and salvage materials are also used for very similar things like upgrading weapons and armor, upgrading potions, etc. But in the early game, you will get the same amount of salvage materials when you salvage a gear piece compared to what you will get later on in the game. However, the gold cost associated with your items actually scales quite significantly, and you'll notice that as you get later on in the game, the gold cost associated with selling is going to be massively increased. So you should salvage at the beginning of the game, and then as you get later on, that is when you should consider selling more items to get a ton of gold. Anytime you've dropped a piece of equipment, oftentimes people will come back to the blacksmith to go ahead and salvage it or simply sell it. And you might have noticed in the previous clip, I sold a whole group of items at a single point, and that is because you can actually mark items as junk by hitting spacebar on the PC. And when you do so, you'll put a line through it, and that is marked as junk, which allows you to instantly salvage all junk or potentially sell a mass group of items at one time. Around the map, there are these things called Altars of Lilith, and these are actually permanent stat boost for your characters across seasons. You'll get permanent attributes in your character sheet, such as strength, intelligence, willpower, dexterity. There's even a couple paragon points and some obol cap increasing, and these are very, very important to acquire in order for you to power up your character, but also to transfer between seasons. You can actually teleport without using your town portal by going onto the map, and even inside a dungeon, you can actually click on the world map tab here and teleport to any waypoints at any point. You do not need to be in a specific area or in a town. If you're randomly in the open world, you can teleport to any waypoint at any time, simply going through the map menus in the bottom left hand of your screen. A couple really important setting tips here. You absolutely want to turn on advanced tooltip compare and advanced tooltip information in the settings in order for you to actually see the potential rolls on the items. You'll see here it says +2 ranks of dash, and that can go from 2 to 4, and you won't see that next information in the little brackets without that information on. And when you start to compare items, you will also see the percentage increase or decrease based on those items with these tips. Another really important movement tip here: in the gameplay tab of the controls settings tab, you will find the force move option. This allows you to move without clicking, and you can bound it to any key. I bind mine to spacebar, and it allows me to move without potentially clicking on an enemy. That way I can move under someone or past someone without misclicking. And I know for some of you, you do not like the HUD right smack dab in the middle of your screen. You can actually change it to the left-hand corner, which to me looks absolutely insane. But for those of you that might like it a little bit better, it does provide you a little bit more screen space at the bottom of your screen and kind of shoves all of the chats and menus off into every corner, so you have as much screen space right in the middle as you can. Now, a very brief explanation of damage and damage multiplication. There's a ton of videos out there that will explain this more in depth, but a very, very brief overview is that critical strike chance and damage is a separate multiplier. Vulnerable damage is a separate multiplier, and then overall your base damages on your weapons is a separate multiplier. Most often, all the other damage versus stats or damage with, etc., are going to be in the same multiplicative damage stat. So when you get more of it, it just adds instead of multiplying. For example, here 160% vulnerable damage multiplies on the crit strike damage and crit strike chance, and then multiplies against all of these. Whereas if I have 25% here and 64% here, these add up to 89%. You might have noticed I have every waypoint unlocked, and as you're going throughout the map, you might also notice that you're not going to find these waypoints unless you've actually completed something known as Strongholds. Now, Strongholds are sort of mini open world dungeons in which you complete a couple of objectives, and after which some of them actually give you additional waypoints, which is very, very important to traverse the map and highly recommend doing as soon as possible. A couple rapid fire tips about the Renown system. There is 2,000 total Renown needed to max out every point. You also need to at least reach World Tier 3 to get these last 2 boxes unlocked. You also do not need to complete everything. You might notice down here that each area or side dungeon has a different Renown value. These are one-time completion only, the dungeons that is, and the Altars of Lilith are also one-time completion. Side quests or Strongholds waypoints, all of these are all one-time completions. And in order to kind of acknowledge which ones you've completed and which ones you have not, you might notice that some of the dungeons have no icon next to it, and some of them have this little chest icon. When you see the little chest icon and it says rewarded on first completion, that means that you have not completed that dungeon and you could still get renown for it. As you're going throughout the maps, and especially if you're playing in a group, if you drop a legendary across some area and you're not there to pick it up or you don't see it, don't worry, you have 10 potential slots and they will all get sent to your stash here unless you reach that maximum of 10 slots. So be sure to check it every once in a while, just in case if you've dropped a legendary and you did not remember to pick it up. Sellers can actually have a secret goblin cellar where you walk in and it's just a bunch of treasure goblins. For those of you that are sort of interested in doing some more cellars, you might get a special surprise. When you first reach 50 and unlock the Paragon board, you might notice that you're missing a ton of your glyphs. And these will actually start dropping at level 50, even if you're able to unlock World Tier 3 earlier than that. And they typically drop from various dungeons, the Tree of Whispers bounty collection system, as well as you can get one sigil for nightmare dungeons. They will oftentimes drop from nightmare dungeons as well. The way you upgrade these glyphs is through the nightmare dungeons themselves, and each level is increasingly more and more XP, and also the tier associated with the nightmare dungeon, the higher you go, for example, this 135 is going to give you higher XP than one that might be potentially lower, or less XP than one that might be potentially a higher tier, all the way up to tier 100. This next tip really applies to the rogues and barbarians of the world, and that is that usually you have an offhand weapon that you're not using. For example, I have my crossbow on, and this does not affect my melee twisting blades damage. However, the stats on this weapon do apply to my entire character. So you do want to build up every single piece of gear, because every single piece of gear globally applies stats to your entire character. When attempting to imprint an aspect, you can use aspects from your inventory that you've acquired from other legendary items, or you can use the Codex of Power, which is unlimited uses. You earn each Codex of Power aspect through one-time completion of dungeons, but if you have one, just use it because you can use it again immediately after. Side quests are located throughout the world of Sanctuary, but one very, very important tip to remember is that you can actually acquire a side quest which forces you to go inside a dungeon and then complete both at the same time. This saves you quite a bit of time instead of coming back and repeating the same dungeon a second time, because once you've completed it once, you've already acquired the Renown and the Codex, so the only thing you're getting is essentially just a little bit of XP, and you could have done something different to get more XP. In combat, you can actually swap any sort of specialization or talent at any point. You can see here, I could swap my specialization and it completely changes how I play my character, or I can even go into the skill tree and potentially pick up a different skill if I wanted to, and it will not have any cooldown, assuming that that ability was not on cooldown either. If you swap to potentially a charge ability, you can see it still has the charges available, and if I were to use both charges here and then go ahead and swap to another different ability, that ability could refresh that potential cooldown. But if I swap back to dash here, what you'll notice is it still has a cooldown, because when I swapped it off, it had a cooldown. So as long as the ability that you just used and you're not swapping back to an ability that you just used, it will have a fresh cooldown, and you can replace abilities at any point during combat. For those of you a bit later on in the game, you might have noticed that you're dropping flawless gems. This is actually not the highest tier. If we go to the jeweler here, you could see that you could actually craft a royal version of that gem. Now, these earlier versions also can craft up, but you can see here, when you're going and getting the flawless ones, you need 3 of them to create a royal version, which is going to give you a small bonus in stats. One important thing to remember throughout your playthrough of Diablo 4 is that experience is king. There are a lot of things that base their numbers off your level differential. For example, armor. You'd see it reduces physical damage taken from enemies of equal level by 45%. So if the enemy is higher level than you, you're actually going to be not reducing the damage nearly as much, which is one of the reasons why getting higher level actually will make you do more damage and also be a lot more tankier just by the nature of leveling up, regardless of the Paragon points or potentially upgrades that you could acquire. When enchanting pieces of gear, you oftentimes need very rare materials later on in the game. Earlier on, you can enchant pieces of gear, and when you do so, you can pick one of the stats to enchant, and you can only pick one. Once you've enchanted, you can no longer change which slot or substat that you're replacing. And when you reroll, you're going to get 2 new options and then the option to keep it the same. And then when you enchant it, it will scale in cost infinitely, as far as I've seen. So if you have, for example, 7 or 8 different enchants, it's just going to keep scaling in gold cost. So just be aware of that. My last tip for you all is to not die playing Diablo. For those of you that especially are super hardcore grinders, but also for those of you that just want to enjoy the game and have some fun, make sure that that is your primary experience, is that having fun and enjoying the game. Obviously, you don't want to play a game that you're not having fun. And of course, for those of you that are like myself, make sure you get some sleep. Make sure you are taking care of yourself, because at the end of the day, we're all here and we're all in the community of Diablo, and it's going to be here for a long time. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, sub to the channel, and I'll see you all for the next Diablo 4 video.